The dinner table was set for two that night. Pasta with marinara, garlic bread, a candle I'd lit more out of habit than romance. And on his plate, instead of a napkin, there was a single sheet of paper. A spreadsheet, actually. Printed clean, every column aligned, every number highlighted in yellow. 6 months of groceries. 6 months of electric bills, gas bills, water bills, internet. Every Walmart run, every Target haul, every time I'd swiped my debit card at Kroger while he was at home watching football. The total at the bottom, in bold, $4,847. I wasn't there when he found it. I'd gone to sit on the back porch with a glass of iced tea, and I waited. I listened to the crickets and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, and I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The question I'd finally asked that morning. The look on his face. Not guilt, not shame, but genuine, baffled surprise. Like I'd asked him something in a foreign language. Like the very concept of splitting grocery bills with your wife was an exotic custom from some country he'd never heard of. "Why money?" he'd said. "Isn't love enough?" I'd stood there in the kitchen holding a crumpled receipt from Publix, $127 for the week. And I'd looked at my husband, Brandon, this man I'd been married to for 4 years, and I didn't say a word. Because I was afraid of what would come out if I opened my mouth. So I saved it. I saved it all for the spreadsheet. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with a spreadsheet and a candle and a very long silence. It starts the way so many of these stories start, with a woman who is genuinely, completely, embarrassingly in love. I met Brandon Kelly at a mutual friend's birthday party in Columbus, Ohio, back in the spring of 2018. I was 31. I'd just gotten out of a 2-year relationship with a guy named Travis, who'd been lovely in theory and absolutely exhausting in practice. The kind of man who needed emotional caretaking the way some people need a second cup of coffee in the morning. Just constant, daily, non-negotiable maintenance. So, when Travis and I finally called it quits, I told myself I was done for a while. I was going to focus on my job, my savings account, my apartment that I'd finally gotten to a place that felt like mine. I was a project coordinator at a mid-size logistics company downtown. Good salary, not glamorous, but steady. $62,000 a year, which in Columbus went a lot further than it would have somewhere like Chicago or New York. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Clintonville that I'd spent 2 years making cozy. A real couch, not a futon. Actual curtains. A bookshelf I'd assembled myself over the course of a very frustrating Sunday afternoon. I had a 401k I was contributing to. I had a savings account with just over $8,000 in it. I was, by most measures, a functional adult with a plan. Then, I met Brandon. He was standing by the kitchen island at my friend Melissa's birthday party, holding a bottle of Modelo, laughing at something. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with dark hair that was starting to go a little gray at the temples, which on him looked distinguished rather than tired. He had this easy, unhurried way of talking, like he had all the time in the world and was genuinely interested in whatever you were saying. We talked for 3 hours that night. About Columbus, about our families, about a documentary we'd both seen about deep-sea creatures that terrified and fascinated us in equal measure. He made me laugh 4 times in the first 20 minutes, which was, I told Melissa later, basically my threshold for this person is dangerous. He was a sales rep for a medical device company, the kind of job that sounds impressive at cocktail parties, but translates in practice to a lot of driving and a variable income depending on how the quarter went. He'd been at it for about 6 years. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Westerville, drove a leased Ford F-150, and had, I would come to learn, a very relaxed relationship with financial planning. But that first night, none of that was visible. What was visible was the warmth, the laugh, the way he looked at me like I was the most interesting person who'd happened to walk into that kitchen. We dated for a year and a half, and it was genuinely wonderful. I know that's what everyone says about the before, and I know it's supposed to be the part where I tell you the warning signs I missed. But I want to be honest. It really was wonderful. We did the things couples do when they're falling in love. Weekend trips to Hocking Hills, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and the Times on his couch, dinners at this little Italian place on High Street where the owner knew Brandon by name. He was affectionate and attentive and funny. He made me feel seen in a way Travis never had. The finances, his loose, easy-come, easy-go attitude toward money. I registered it, but I categorized it as different, not dangerous. He'd pick up dinner sometimes. I'd pick up dinner other times. It felt balanced enough. We weren't living together, so the real math of it wasn't visible yet. I told myself he was just a little less organized than me, a little more spontaneous. I told myself that was fine, actually, that I didn't need another person who kept a budget spreadsheet, because I already was that person, and 2 of those in one relationship was probably overkill. We got engaged in March of 2020. Yes, that March, the one that turned the whole world sideways. He proposed in my apartment, just the 2 of us, with a ring he'd picked out himself, a simple oval solitaire on a gold band. It was perfect. The timing was terrible, and it was perfect. We were in lockdown 3 weeks later, and honestly, that first year of the pandemic, cooped up together in my Clintonville apartment, was one of the best years of my life. We cooked together, watched movies, played board games, argued about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom. It felt like we were building something real. We got married in September of 2021. Small ceremony, just family and close friends, 30 people in a backyard in Bexley. Melissa as my maid of honor, his college friend Derek as best man. My mom cried, his mom, Karen, and I want to remember to come back to Karen, smiled the way she always smiled, which was the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd answered a question wrong on a test you didn't know you were taking. We moved into a rental house in Gahanna that October. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a little backyard, a 2-car garage. $1,150 a month. I was excited about it in a way that felt almost embarrassing. I kept walking through the rooms and just stopping, feeling grateful. This was it. This was the thing I'd been building toward, the person, the home, the life. And then, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, something started to shift. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was the kind of shift you don't notice until you're already off balance. The first month in the house, I paid the full rent because Brandon's commission check was delayed. Fine, that happens. The second month, I paid utilities because he'd had a slow quarter and was catching up. Also fine, I told myself. By month 4, I realized I had paid for every single grocery run since we'd moved in. Not because we'd agreed to it, not because of any conversation we'd had, simply because whenever we needed something from the store, I was the one who went, and therefore, I was the one who paid. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself we needed to sit down and have a real conversation about how we were going to handle household expenses. And I kept putting that conversation off because I didn't want to be the person who made love feel like a business negotiation. I'd been raised to believe that talking about money with your partner was somehow unromantic. That if you really loved each other, it would all just work itself out. My mother had managed the household finances entirely, while my dad handled his own spending money. and that had seemed to work fine. So maybe this was just what marriage looked like. One person carrying the household weight, while the other contributed in other ways. But then, October became November, became December, and the holidays hit. And I found myself spending $340 at Kroger the week of Thanksgiving for a dinner I hosted for both of our families. Brandon's mom, Karen, his sister, Jess, his brother-in-law, Pete, plus my parents and my younger sister, Rachel. I bought the turkey, the sides, the wine, the fancy sparkling cider for Rachel, who didn't drink. Brandon contributed a 6-pack of beer he'd already had in the fridge. I remember standing at the kitchen sink after everyone left, washing dishes, while Brandon sat in the living room watching football highlights and thinking, this is not right. This doesn't feel right. But I still didn't say anything. I was afraid of the conversation. I was afraid of what it would mean if I started it and he reacted badly. I was afraid of looking like the woman who counted pennies, who made love transactional, who couldn't just be grateful for what she had. So I kept quiet, and I kept paying. And the spreadsheet that was waiting for him on his dinner plate that evening in early April, the one with $4,847 in bold at the bottom, was 4 months in the making. What happened when he finally walked through the back door and into the kitchen, I could hear from the porch. The scrape of the chair, the pause, the long, long silence, and then his voice calling my name. Ashley. Not a question, not an apology, just my name. In a tone I hadn't quite heard from him before. I set down my iced tea and went inside. I walked back inside through the sliding glass door, and the kitchen felt smaller than it ever had before. Brandon was standing at the table, not sitting, standing. The spreadsheet was in his hand, and he was looking at it the way you look at something you're hoping will change if you stare at it long enough. Like maybe the numbers would rearrange themselves into something more comfortable. He looked up when I came in. "What is this?" he said. "You can read," I said. "So read it." He set the paper down on the table, slowly, like it was fragile. He pulled out his chair and sat. I sat across from him. The candle was still burning between us, and for a second I had the absurd thought that I should blow it out, that candlelight was wrong for this conversation, that this conversation deserved fluorescence. "Ashley," he said again, and this time it was gentler. "Come on. You made a spreadsheet." I did. "Of groceries. And utilities. Gas, electric, water, internet. 6 months. It's all labeled." He looked down at the paper again. His jaw moved slightly, like he was doing math in his head. Or trying to. "I know I've been behind on some things. You haven't been behind," I said. "Behind implies you have a tab somewhere. You don't have a tab. You haven't paid for a single grocery run since we moved into this house. Not one." He opened his mouth and then closed it. He picked up a piece of garlic bread, which I found almost impressive. The man's stress response was apparently to reach for carbohydrates, and then seemed to think better of it and put it back down. "I buy stuff," he said finally. "I bought that case of beer for the game last week." "Yes, Brandon, you bought yourself a case of beer. That is not the same as buying groceries." "I pay my share of the rent." "Do you?" I asked. "Because I counted that too. You paid $700 of the $1,150 in October because your commission check was delayed and you asked me to cover the rest. You paid the full amount in November. December, you gave me $600 and said you'd get me the rest after the holidays. I'm still waiting on that $150. January and February, you paid in full. March, you gave me a check that bounced and then Venmo'd me the money 4 days later. The color in his face changed. Not red exactly, more like a kind of blotchy, mottled embarrassment that started at his neck and worked its way up. A bounced check, I said. For rent. At our house. That was a mistake. I miscalculated. I know it was a mistake, I said. I'm not calling you a criminal. I'm telling you that I have been floating this household for 6 months and you have not noticed. Or you've noticed and you haven't said anything. And I need to know which one it is. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car went past on the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen wall. The candle flickered. I've been stressed, he said. Work has been really hard. The new territory they gave me is a nightmare. The accounts are all smaller, the commission structure changed, and I've been working twice as hard for the same money or less. I didn't want to put that on you. Something in me softened involuntarily, which I hated. Because that was the thing about Brandon. He always had a reason. Not an excuse, exactly. A reason. Something real and human and understandable that made it very hard to stay as angry as the situation warranted. I understand that work is hard, I said, keeping my voice level. But that doesn't explain why you've never once offered to go to the grocery store, or said, hey, let me handle utilities this month, or even asked how much things cost. Brandon, I spent $340 at Kroger the week of Thanksgiving, for a dinner I cooked for both of our families. You contributed beer you already had in the fridge. He flinched at that. Good. You're right, he said. He said it quietly, looking at the tablecloth. You're right. I should have offered. I should have been paying attention. I got caught up in my own stuff, and I let you carry more than you should have. I'm sorry. And here's the thing about apologies. Some of them land, and some of them don't. And the difference isn't always in the words, it's in the weight behind them. This apology landed. A little. I could feel it. It was genuine. Brandon was not, at his core, a dishonest man. He meant it. He was sitting there looking genuinely ashamed. But it also felt small. Too small for what it needed to carry. Okay, I said. So going forward, we need to actually talk about how we're splitting household expenses, not informally. I want a real system. Okay, he said. And the $4,800, I said. He looked up. I'm not asking you to pay it back all at once, I said. I'm not trying to make this punitive, but I need you to acknowledge that it's real, that you owe it, and I need a plan. He nodded slowly. Yeah, okay, we can figure that out. We ate dinner, mostly in silence, but not the hostile kind, the processing kind. He helped clear the table without being asked, which he didn't always do. He kissed me on the cheek before we went to sleep. I lay in the dark afterward thinking, okay. This was the conversation we needed to have. We had it. Things will be different now. I actually believed that. For about 3 weeks, I believed it. The first week after the spreadsheet conversation, Brandon went to Kroger by himself and came home with $94 worth of groceries. He set them on the counter and said, I got stuff for the week, with the quiet pride of a man who had just completed a very significant personal achievement. I thanked him and put everything away and didn't say anything about the fact that he'd bought 3 different kinds of chips but forgotten milk, eggs, and the dish soap we'd been out of for 4 days. Small victories. Week 2. He Venmoed me $300 with a note that said, "Toward the total." I stared at my phone for a moment and then replied with a thumbs up emoji, which felt both insufficient and exactly right. Week 3. He asked me to sit down with him and look at a budget spreadsheet he'd started on his laptop. His own spreadsheet. I could have cried. Not from happiness exactly, but from the relief of feeling like I was not alone in this, like my husband was actually looking at the same reality I'd been living in for months. We spent 45 minutes going through it together. His income, his expenses, what a reasonable contribution to joint household costs would look like given where he was financially. It wasn't perfect. His numbers for his own spending were optimistic in ways I recognized. But he was trying. I told Melissa about it over coffee that Saturday. She was cautiously supportive in the way of someone who has heard this kind of story before and knows how they usually go, but who loves you enough to let you feel hopeful. "That's great," she said. "I'm glad he heard you." And then, on a Tuesday in mid-April, I came home from work to find a silver Ford F-150 in the driveway that was not Brandon's silver Ford F-150. It was shinier, newer. The trim level was higher. I could see it even from the street, the way the chrome caught the late afternoon light. I pulled my car in next to it and sat for a second with the engine off, telling myself there was an explanation. His lease was up soon, I knew that. He must have been shopping around. I went inside. Brandon was in the kitchen, and he was smiling the way he smiled when he'd done something he was excited about. The smile that went all the way to his eyes. The one I'd fallen in love with at Melissa's party. "What do you think?" he said. "What is that?" I said. "New truck." My lease was up in 2 weeks, so I went ahead and pulled the trigger. Isn't she nice? Same model, but the XLT trim now. Heated seats, better sound system. "Brandon." I put my keys down on the counter very carefully. "We talked about this. 3 weeks ago, we sat down and made a budget. Your car payment was on that budget. The number we used was your current payment." "I know, but the new one is only like $40 more a month." "You owe me $4,800, I said. "You paid back $300 of it, and you just upgraded your truck." The smile dimmed. "It's only $40 more. That's not the point," I said. "The point is that when you have a choice between paying back what you owe me or getting heated seats, you chose heated seats." "That's not how I was thinking about it. Then how were you thinking about it?" He rubbed the back of his neck, and I recognized that gesture. It was the gesture that meant he hadn't been thinking about it in any particular organized way. That the truck had presented itself as an appealing option and he'd taken it. The same way he took the path of least resistance in most things. The same way he'd let me carry the household for 6 months without noticing. "I need a reliable vehicle for work," he said. "You know that. I drive 40,000 miles a year." "Your current truck was reliable." "The lease was up." "You could have gotten the same model." "For basically the same payment." $40 is not basically the same, Brandon. $40 a month is $480 a year, which is money that could go toward the $4,500 you still owe me, which is money that's in your truck's heated seats instead of my savings account where it belongs." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something that I have thought about many times since, something that I keep turning over and over, trying to decide if he understood what he was saying or if it just came out. "You know, I feel like ever since that spreadsheet, this relationship has become about money. And I don't think that's healthy." I stared at him. "I'm not trying to be a bad husband," he said. And his voice was earnest, honestly earnest, which made it so much worse. I love you. I want us to be good. But I feel like we've been fighting about money every week, and I don't want money to be the thing we're always fighting about. Brandon, I said slowly, we're fighting about money because you aren't contributing any. I know, and I'm working on it. But I feel like I'm being punished every time I turn around, and it's hard to— You feel like you're being punished, I repeated. I just mean, you feel like you're being punished, I said again, more quietly, by being asked to pay for the food we both eat. He had the grace to look uncomfortable, but he didn't take it back. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I stared at the carpet, and I thought about the word punished, and what it meant that he'd used it. That in his mental model of our marriage, my simply asking him to meet basic financial obligations registered as punishment, which meant he had been operating this whole time under the assumption that not contributing was the default, the baseline, the normal. That what I was asking for was not equity, but some kind of extra demand, some special requirement above and beyond. I thought about the budget spreadsheet on his laptop and whether he'd opened it since we'd made it together. I thought about the Venmo notification I'd gotten from him that said, "Toward the total," and how there had been exactly one of those, and how the number was 300 out of 4,800, and how the truck probably required an increased security deposit. And I thought about something that had been sitting at the back of my mind for a few weeks, something I'd been actively choosing not to look at directly. The way you don't look directly at something bright because you know it'll hurt. Brandon's income, his commission structure, the new territory that was harder, the slower quarters, the check that bounced. I'd been taking his word for all of it. I had never actually seen his pay stubs. I had never actually looked at his bank account. We didn't have a joint account. We'd talked about opening one, but hadn't gotten around to it. And now I was realizing that hadn't gotten around to it might have been a more deliberate decision on his part than I'd understood. I didn't know what Brandon actually made. I didn't know what he actually spent. I knew what he'd told me, and I knew that the truck in our driveway had been a choice. And I knew that the check that bounced in March had come from somewhere. And I knew that the $300 he'd Venmo'd me was 300 out of 4,800. And I knew that right now he was probably standing in the kitchen, feeling aggrieved. I reached for my phone, not to call anyone, just to think. And then my phone buzzed, and the name on the screen was Karen, his mother. And my stomach dropped in the specific way it always dropped when Karen called, because Karen never called me just to talk. Karen called when she had something to say. I let it ring. Once. Twice. On the third ring, I picked up. "Ashley," Karen said. "I'm glad I caught you. I've been meaning to reach out. I had coffee with Brandon yesterday and, well, I think we need to talk." "Ashley," Karen said. "I'm glad I caught you. I've been meaning to reach out. I had coffee with Brandon yesterday and, well, I think we need to talk." I stood in the bedroom with the phone pressed to my ear and thought about how many ways that sentence could go. Karen Kelly was not a woman who called to chat. She was a woman who called with purpose, and her purpose was never casual and never comfortable. The smile that made you feel like you'd failed a test, that was Karen. And now she'd had coffee with my husband. My husband, who was currently standing in our kitchen feeling aggrieved about being asked to pay for food. and she thought we needed to talk. "About what?" I said. I kept my voice even. "About you and Brandon," she said. "About the fact that he came to me very upset yesterday. Ashley, I have to be honest with you. I was surprised. I didn't realize there was so much tension between you two." Something cold moved through me. Not anger, not yet. Something more like recognition, like seeing a shape in the dark that you'd hoped was furniture. "He told you about the spreadsheet," I said. "He told me you've been keeping track of everything he spends, like an accountant, like he's an employee." She paused. "I told him marriage isn't supposed to feel like a performance review." I sat down on the edge of the bed. The carpet under my feet was the same carpet I'd stared at 20 minutes ago, when Brandon had called me punished. Same carpet, same room, completely different world. "Karen," I said, "I made a spreadsheet of household expenses because your son hadn't contributed to a single grocery run in 6 months. I spent $4,800 keeping this house running while he bought a new truck." A beat of silence. Then, "He works very hard, Ashley. Sales is a demanding career. You have a steady salary. You don't understand the pressure of variable income." "I understand that when I didn't have money, I didn't buy a new truck," I said. "That's not fair." "Which part?" Another silence. When Karen spoke again, her voice had shifted, still controlled, but with something underneath it, something careful. "I just want you both to be happy. You're my daughter-in-law. I care about you. But Brandon is my son, and when he comes to me hurting, I have to respond to that." "He came to you hurting," I repeated. "He feels like you've turned the marriage into a financial transaction." I looked at the ceiling. There was a small water stain in the corner that I'd meant to ask the landlord about for 3 months. "I turned it into a financial transaction," I said, "by asking him to pay for groceries." "Ashley, Karen, I have to go." I said it quietly, not rudely, but firmly. "I appreciate you calling. I really do. But this is between me and Brandon, and I need to talk to him directly." I hung up. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. Outside, I could hear Brandon moving around in the kitchen. The sound of the refrigerator opening, a cabinet closing, the specific creak of the third floorboard from the hallway that I'd learned to recognize as his footstep. My husband, who had gone to his mother, who had described my spreadsheet not as a reasonable accounting of shared expenses, but as surveillance, who had, apparently, painted himself as the wounded party in a story where he hadn't paid for groceries in half a year. That was the moment I think I understood, for the first time, that I was not dealing with disorganization. I was not dealing with a man who was overwhelmed and forgetful. I was dealing with something more deliberate than that. Not malicious, maybe, not calculated in the cold-blooded sense, but deeply, structurally intentional. Brandon had built a life in which he was never asked to account for himself. And when I'd asked, he hadn't just pushed back. He'd gone to his mother to build a case. I didn't sleep well that night, or the next, or the one after that. The week that followed Karen's call was the worst week of my marriage up to that point. Brandon and I didn't fight. We were too careful for that, too controlled. What we did was exist in the same house at a careful, painful distance. He came home from work, asked how my day was, ate the dinner I'd made. I kept making dinner because I didn't know how not to, because I'd been the one who cooked since the beginning, and stopping felt like a declaration I wasn't ready to make. And then went to the couch to watch TV while I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, going through our finances. Our finances. Except they weren't our finances, were they? They were my finances and his finances, and the gap between them that I'd been filling with my debit card for 6 months. I started pulling everything together. Bank statements, Venmo records, the Kroger receipts I'd been photographing with my phone since February because some part of me, some careful, watchful part, had known this day would come. I built a second spreadsheet, more detailed than the first, not just the household expenses, everything. What I earned, what I'd saved before we got married, what had happened to my savings since we moved into the Gahanna house, what I was on track for retirement-wise, and what I'd be on track for if things continued the way they were going. The numbers were not good. In the 6 months since we'd moved in, my savings account had dropped from just over $8,000 to just under $5,000. $3,000. Gone. Into groceries, utilities, and the overflow from months when Brandon's rent contribution came up short. $3,000 that had taken me years to save and 18 months to accumulate after Travis and I broke up. Just quietly bleeding out of my account into the operations of a household that was supposed to be shared. I thought about my 401k. I was still contributing, thank God, but I'd reduced my contribution percentage when we moved in because I thought we'd have 2 incomes covering expenses, and I could redirect some of my take-home to savings. Instead, I'd redirected it to Kroger and Dominion Energy. I thought about the spreadsheet Brandon had made on his laptop, the one we'd sat down with together, the one I'd felt so hopeful about. I asked him one evening, carefully, if he'd updated it recently. "I've been meaning to," he said, not looking up from his phone. "I'd like to go over it together again soon," I said. "Yeah, for sure. This week." That week came and went. He didn't bring it up. I didn't push. I was learning something about how Brandon operated, and I was filing it away. On a Friday night, Melissa called. Not to ask how I was doing. She'd texted that twice, and I'd given her the "fine, everything's fine" response that fooled neither of us. But to tell me she was coming over. "I'm bringing wine, and I'm not asking," she said. "Unlock the door." Brandon was out, a work dinner, he'd said, though he hadn't mentioned with whom. I unlocked the door. Melissa arrived with a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, and the expression of someone who had decided to be done with pleasantries. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the spreadsheet had been, and I told her everything. The truck, Karen's phone call, Brandon's word, punished, the savings account, the 401k contribution I'd reduced, the budget spreadsheet on his laptop that he hadn't opened in 3 weeks. All of it. And Melissa listened the way she always listened, which was with her full body, leaning forward, not interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Ash," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer it. Okay? Do you think this is going to change?" I looked at my wine glass. "He made a spreadsheet," I said. "He Venmo'd me $300. And then he bought a new truck." "And then he bought a new truck," I agreed. "And went to his mother." And went to his mother. Melissa turned her wine glass slowly on the table. "I've known you for 11 years, she said. "And I've watched you organize around other people your whole life. Travis needed emotional maintenance, so you gave it. Your job needed someone to stay late and catch the details nobody else caught, so you did it. and now Brandon needs someone to fund his life without making him feel bad about it. And you've been doing that too. She looked at me. At some point, Ash, you have to stop being the person who makes everything work for everyone else. I felt the back of my throat tighten. That's easy to say. I know it is. I know. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. But I also know that you came home to a new truck your husband bought while he still owes you $4,500. And you went into the bedroom and cried by yourself instead of walking out the front door. And I'm not judging you for that. I just want you to see it. I saw it. We sat there for another hour, and somewhere in that hour, something shifted in me. Not dramatically, not the way it shifts in movies with swelling music and a sudden clarity. It was quieter than that. More like something that had been bent, gradually returning to its original shape. I thought about the first spreadsheet, the one I'd left on his dinner plate. I thought about how much courage it had taken me to make it, to print it, to put it there. How proud I'd been of myself, how sure I was that it would change something. And I thought, I have been waiting for Brandon to change. I have been presenting evidence and making cases and having conversations and waiting for him to see what I see. And he doesn't see it. Not because he can't, but because seeing it would require him to give something up. The comfort of being taken care of. The ease of a life where someone else notices what needs doing and does it. He wasn't going to give that up because I made a spreadsheet. I was going to have to do something different. After Melissa left, I sat at the kitchen table alone for a while. I opened my laptop. I did something I had never done in our marriage, something that felt like crossing a line I hadn't known existed until I was already on the other side of it. I looked up divorce attorneys in Columbus, Ohio. I didn't call anyone. I didn't make an appointment. I just looked. Read some websites, looked at the process, looked at what equitable division of assets meant in Ohio, what it meant that we rented rather than owned, what it meant that we had no joint accounts. I read until my eyes hurt, and then I closed the laptop and went to bed. Brandon came home at 11:15. I heard him in the kitchen, heard the refrigerator open, heard him brush his teeth. He came into the bedroom and slid in beside me in the dark. "You still up?" he said softly. "No," I said. He accepted that and rolled over. Within 10 minutes, he was breathing the slow, even breath of someone asleep. I lay beside him in the dark, staring at the ceiling, at the shape of the water stain I could just barely make out by the light coming under the door. My phone was on the nightstand. I reached for it, opened it. In my browser history, right at the top, Columbus, Ohio divorce attorney, free consultation. I stared at the words for a moment. Then I opened a new tab and started a document in Google Drive. Not a spreadsheet this time, a list. Quiet, private, organized. Things I needed to know. Things I needed to do. Things I needed to protect. At the top of the list I typed, "Talk to someone who actually knows what's happening with his money." I thought about Karen, who had called to defend her son, and had, perhaps without meaning to, told me something important. Brandon had been to see her, had sat across from his mother over coffee and told his version of this story. Had been building something, even if I didn't know yet exactly what. The question was whether anyone else had been at that table. I added a second item to the list. Find out who else he's been talking to. And then, because my brain was moving faster than it had in weeks, sharper and colder and more focused, I added a third. Stop making dinner. It sounds small. It was not small. It was the first decision I'd made in this marriage that was entirely, unapologetically, for me. Not a conversation, not a spreadsheet, not a case I was making to a man who didn't want to hear it. Just a quiet, private withdrawal of something I'd been giving freely for years, something that had been taken for granted so completely it had become invisible. I put my phone down. The bedroom was dark and quiet. Brandon slept beside me, easy and unbothered, and I lay there with my list and my browser history, and the slow, cold feeling of a woman who has finally stopped waiting and started planning. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A text. I turned it over and looked at the screen. It was from a number I didn't recognize, Ohio area code. The message was 4 words long. "We should talk. Derek." I stared at those 4 words for a long time. We should talk. Derek. Derek, who had been Brandon's best man. Derek, who had given a toast at our wedding about what a great guy Brandon was, how lucky I was, how he'd never seen his friend so happy. Derek, who I had maybe spoken to 6 times since September 2021 and whose number I did not have saved in my phone. I typed back, "How did you get this number?" The response came in under 2 minutes. Brandon's phone. "I'm sorry for reaching out this way, but I think you need to know some things. Can we talk tomorrow?" I put the phone face down on the nightstand. Brandon was still breathing slowly beside me, deep in sleep, completely unaware. I picked the phone back up. "Yes," I typed. "Call me at noon." I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay there doing the math on Derek. Why he would reach out, what he could possibly know, whether this was some kind of setup, some play Brandon had arranged to get ahead of something. But that didn't make sense. Brandon didn't operate with that kind of strategic foresight. He operated by drifting and reacting. He didn't plan. That was the whole problem. Derek called at 12:03 the next day. I was parked in my car in the lot behind my office building, engine off, windows down. It was a Tuesday in late April, and the air smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and I sat there gripping my phone like it was the only solid thing in the world. "Ashley," Derek said. "Thanks for picking up." "What do you know?" I said. No preamble, no small talk. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Brandon borrowed money from me. $8,000. Last October. Right around when you two moved into the Gahanna house." The number landed somewhere in my chest. $8,000. The same month I'd covered the full rent because his commission check was delayed. The same month I'd paid for every grocery run, every utility bill, every household expense, while he told me he was catching up. "He said it was for the security deposit," Derek said. "Said he was between commission cycles and things were tight. I gave it to him because he's my best friend. I figured he'd pay me back in a couple months." He paused. "It's been 6 months. Every time I bring it up, he says he's working on it. Last week, I ran into his sister Jess at a thing, and she mentioned that you two had been having some financial tension, and she said he'd just leased a new truck." Another pause. And I thought, okay, someone needs to say something to somebody. I closed my eyes. "He told you the $8,000 was for the security deposit." "Yeah." "Derek, our security deposit on the Gahanna house was 1 month's rent. $1150. Silence. "He kept the rest," I said. It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry, Ashley. I genuinely didn't know. I wouldn't have. I just thought you should know. Because if he's borrowed money from me and not told you, and he's not paying household expenses, and I don't know what's going on, but it didn't feel right to stay quiet. I thanked him. I don't remember what else I said. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes after we hung up, watching a pigeon investigate something near the dumpster, and I thought about $8,000. $8,000. Almost exactly what my savings account had held before we moved into that house. Almost exactly what I'd lost since October. He had borrowed $8,000 from his best man, kept the difference after the deposit, never told me, and watched me drain my savings account to keep the lights on. That evening, I called the number I'd looked up a few weeks earlier, a divorce attorney in Columbus. Her name was Patricia, and her assistant got me a free 30-minute consultation for the following Thursday. I wrote the appointment in my phone under dentist because I wasn't ready for Brandon to see the real name, and I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. Not until I knew exactly where I stood. Thursday came. Patricia's office was in a building downtown, 14th floor, a view of the Scioto River if you craned your neck slightly. She was about 55, short silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, the demeanor of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not going to be surprised by mine. She listened while I talked. She took notes. She didn't flinch at any of it. Not the spreadsheet, not the truck, not the bounced check, not Derek's $8,000, not Karen's phone call. When I finished, she took off her reading glasses and looked at me. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state," she said. "Not 50-50, equitable. The court considers contributions to the marriage, both financial and otherwise. You have documentation of your financial contributions. That matters." She tapped her notepad. "The loan from Derek. Do you have that in writing anywhere?" "I don't know. Derek might." "Find out. If there's a text chain, a Venmo record, anything."
That matters too.
She leaned forward slightly. "I want to ask you something directly. Are you here because you want to know your options, or because you've already decided?" I thought about Brandon sleeping peacefully while I lay awake doing math. I thought about the word punished. I thought about Karen's phone call. I thought about the pigeon by the dumpster and $8,000 that had evaporated into a security deposit story while I swiped my debit card at Kroger week after week. "I've already decided," I said. She nodded once, like that was the right answer, like she'd been waiting for me to say it. I texted Derek from the car. He had the original text chain where Brandon had asked for the loan, had explained it was for the deposit, and had promised repayment within 60 days. Derek forwarded it to me without asking why. He just sent it with a single line. "I hope you're okay." I wasn't, particularly, but I was going to be. I retained Patricia the following Monday. I moved $3,000 into a savings account Brandon had no access to. Money I'd earned since the beginning of the year that I'd been keeping in my main account out of habit, which now felt less like habit and more like carelessness. I talked to my HR department about updating my emergency contact and beneficiary information. I called my bank and asked about the process for separating a joint account. We didn't have one, as it turned out, which was the one thing Brandon's financial avoidance had accidentally done in my favor. I didn't tell Brandon any of this. I went home every evening and made dinner. Yes, I kept making dinner, because Patricia had advised me not to change my behavior dramatically before papers were filed, not to give him reason to claim I'd manufactured a hostile environment. I sat across from my husband at the table where the spreadsheet had been, and I watched him eat. And I thought about all the things I knew that he didn't know I knew. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Calm. A strange, clear, cold calm, like the surface of a lake in early morning. He noticed, in his way. One night he looked up from his pasta and said, "You okay? You've been quiet." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded and went back to eating. He didn't ask what I was tired from. The papers were filed on a Wednesday in early May. Brandon was served at work, which Patricia had recommended, not for drama, but because it was cleaner, less likely to result in an immediate emotional confrontation in our shared home. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon that said simply, "Ashley, call me." I didn't call. I texted back, "I'll be home at 6. We can talk then." When I came through the door that evening, he was sitting at the kitchen table. The divorce petition was on the table in front of him. He looked like a man who had been punched and hadn't quite registered it yet. That slightly stunned, slightly underwater expression of someone whose reality has just shifted without warning. "You filed for divorce," he said. "I did." You didn't even talk to me." I sat down across from him, the same seats we'd sat in for the spreadsheet conversation, the same candle in the middle of the table, unlit this time. "Brandon," I said, "I tried to talk to you. I made a spreadsheet. We had a conversation. You agreed to a budget and didn't follow it. You bought a new truck. You called your mother and told her I was punishing you for asking you to buy groceries. That was talking to you." "That is not the same as telling me you were thinking about divorce." "You borrowed $8,000 from Derek in October," I said. The color left his face. "You told him it was for the security deposit," I said. "Our security deposit was $1,150. You kept the rest. $6,850. While I was paying for groceries and utilities from my savings account, and you were telling me you were between commission cycles." I folded my hands on the table. "That's what I know, Brandon. So when you ask me why I didn't come to you first, that's why. Because I don't know what else I don't know. And I'm not willing to keep finding out the hard way." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the petition on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing, and I watched something move across his face. Not guilt exactly, not the clean, simple thing guilt is supposed to be, but something more complicated. Something like a man seeing himself from the outside for the first time and not recognizing who he was looking at. "I was going to pay Derek back," he said finally. It was almost a whisper. "I believe that you believe that," I said. "Ashley, I believe you meant to pay him back. I believe you meant to contribute to groceries. I believe you meant to update the budget spreadsheet. I believe you meant every single thing you said you were going to do." I paused. But meaning to and doing it are not the same thing. And I spent 4 years waiting for the doing it part, and I can't wait anymore. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook once, and I sat very still and did not reach for him, which was the hardest thing I'd done in the entire 4 years of our marriage. Because I still loved him, in some complicated, diminished, grief-soaked way. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who had found a life where someone else carried the weight, and had simply never stopped letting her. That was its own kind of failure. But it wasn't cruelty. And my heart knew the difference, even when my head needed to override it. "What about the money?" he asked. His voice was muffled behind his hands. "The $4,800. "It's in the petition," I said. "Patricia documented it, along with your loan from Derek and the discrepancy in the deposit story. The court will sort it out. He looked up at that. You talked to a lawyer. I retained a lawyer, yes. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, but a kind of wary recalibration. The look of a man who had assumed he was in a negotiation and was just now understanding he was in a proceeding. He reached for the petition and turned a page, turned another, set it back down. I don't want this, he said. I know. I love you. I know that too, I said. But love was never the problem, Brandon. You love me and you can't pay for groceries. Those two things coexisted in this marriage for 4 years, and I finally understand that one of them doesn't fix the other. He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. Karen called me twice in the week after the filing. I didn't pick up. She sent a text that said, I hope you know what you're doing to this family. I sent back, I do. Take care of yourself, Karen. I blocked her number on the third day, without guilt, without ceremony, the way you close a window when the draft gets cold enough. The divorce was finalized in September, 9 months from the spreadsheet on the dinner plate to the signature on the decree. Ohio being what it is, the process was thorough but not dramatic. The documented household expenses, Derek's text chain, the loan discrepancy, it all added up to a settlement that was, Patricia told me, unusually clear-cut. Brandon didn't contest much. I think, in the end, there was a part of him that understood. Not loudly, not in words, but somewhere underneath the bruised pride and the legal paperwork, he understood that the accounting had always been there, waiting to be done. I'd just been the one to finally do it. I got back the $4,800, folded into the settlement. I got to keep my 401k, untouched. I got my name off the Gahanna lease, which the landlord processed without drama because we were model tenants who had never been late on rent. Me, specifically, who had never been late on rent. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Clintonville. Different building from my old one, but the same neighborhood, the same streets I'd walked when I was 31, and single and building something that felt like mine. Real couch, not a futon. Curtains. A bookshelf I assembled myself on a Sunday afternoon. Less frustrated this time, more practiced. A savings account I started refilling from the first paycheck after closing. Melissa helped me move in. She brought wine, the same Sauvignon Blanc, and we sat on my new couch in a half-unpacked apartment surrounded by boxes, and she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. Like I set something down that I'd been carrying so long, I forgot it wasn't mine. I said. She raised her glass. I raised mine. Derek texted me the week after the finalization. I heard it's official. I'm sorry it ended that way. For what it's worth, you deserved better. I replied, thank you for telling me the truth. It mattered. I meant both sentences completely. It's been 7 months since I moved into this apartment. My savings account is back above $8,000. My 401k contribution is at the percentage it was always supposed to be. I cook dinner when I feel like it, and I eat cereal over the sink when I don't. And there is no one in this kitchen who benefits from my labor without contributing to it. The electric bill is mine. The groceries are mine. The quiet on a Tuesday evening. The book on the nightstand. The candle I light out of genuine pleasure rather than habit. All mine. I think about Brandon sometimes. Not with bitterness, mostly. With something more like the specific sadness you feel for a person who had everything they needed to be different and just never got around to it. He had a wife who loved him, and a home, and a chance to build something real. And he let it drift through his fingers the same way he let everything drift. Not maliciously, not even consciously, just by choosing, every single day, the easier thing. And I think about that spreadsheet, the one I printed on a Tuesday evening in early April, with every column aligned and every number highlighted in yellow and the total at the bottom in bold. The one I put on his dinner plate instead of a napkin while I went to sit on the back porch with a glass of iced tea. I was so afraid to make that spreadsheet. I was so afraid it would make me look small, calculating, unromantic. Like the woman who couldn't just be grateful. Like the woman who made love transactional. But here's what I know now. The spreadsheet wasn't the transaction. The transaction had been running for 6 months before I made it. I just finally made it visible. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for the truth, for the version of your life that's still worth having, is to print it out, put it on the table, and let the numbers speak.